This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
There's something that I hear from a lot of you on, and it's cool because it's something that I care about a lot as well. It's one of my favorite parts of the Bartholomew Town Podcast, and that is the conversations that I have with members of the Rhode Island media. And, you know, different than, let's say, all right, here's X reporter talking about a particular story or a particular issue or recapping the year in politics or whatever it may be. Not that those are disliked or don't get a ton of listens or something like that, because I think covering issues and getting into specifics is kind of what we've really turned the corner on over the last couple hundred episodes here on B-Town. But yeah, there's something really fun about people that you grew up watching on the news or listening to on the radio or currently do, whatever it may be, and getting to know the human beings there and I should say, just having an interesting conversation from an inside baseball perspective about the business. It's Bill Bartholomew here with you for another edition of Rhode Island's podcast of record, B-Town, at ripodcast.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to get shows. Today, an interesting conversation on what I would describe as the magic of talk radio, you know, which is born from, at least from my perspective, a similar place as songwriting, sculpting, you know, making something out of nothing. Really, you could argue even soccer, you know, just like the improvisational aspect of tapping into the human subconscious. And it's just this magical format that it really is more art and performance than like straight journalism. Although I think the best talkers are people who have journalistic credentials and tendencies. You know, there's no doubt about it. But today, a couple of veterans of talking on the radio here in Rhode Island, Jennifer Brien and Ron St. Pierre. So this is a fun one. Hopefully you enjoy it. Remember, you can support the independent journalism, entertainment, opinion, and analysis that B-Town provides for as little as $3 per month. Head to patreon.com/BartholomewTown or simply click the support link wherever you're listening right now. And go ahead and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Bill Bartholomew. You know, I grew up really interested in Rhode Island media and especially radio. And, you know, throughout my life, I've just been more and more and more like a snowball effect, becoming just so fascinated by talkers, whether it's on the talk radio format or in podcasting. And each of you have a long legacy in talk radio and now have sort of transitioned into podcasting as well. So, you know, let's have some fun. Let's talk about stories of what's happening. Yeah, look out the horror.
God forbid we have fun, right, Jen?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm all for that.
Nice.
Anybody knows.
So what, I guess, like for the listeners out there that are unfamiliar with each of you, I guess a little intro here, a little oral with an A, hello, my name is, and what I do sort of moment here for each of you.
Okay. My name is Ron St. Pierre, and I've been doing this for about 4 decades, a little over 4 decades now, and you can take it from here.
My name is Jennifer Brien, and I've been in this industry for on and off for about 20 years now.
And the way we got to know each other and we got to meet is I was programming, actually as the operations manager at WPRO. Steve Cass was doing the morning show. And Steve's longtime producer was pregnant, was going to have a child and wanted to leave. And fortunately, Jen was interning with us at that particular time. So I hired her to be the producer of the Steve Cass show. And then I replaced Steve in the morning and Jen became my co-host.
Well, let's hold up now for 1 minute, because actually what happened was, I mean, that all is true, but let's pull the curtain back a little further. So I was a student. I had finished my service and commitment, and I went to URI. I was taking a class with Steve Cass. It was called Politics in the Media, and he said, "I want everybody to write a paper for me, and don't hold back." And so I wrote a paper about Hillary Clinton and the whole Lewinsky thing and Clinton's crooked penis and all that. And he read it and said, "Oh my gosh, you have to come intern for me." And not because it was so great, because he couldn't believe what I wrote. And so I ended up interning for him. And that's how I actually crossed paths with Ron at that point. But my backstory is Steve Cass pulled me onto the ship. So,
and when Jen said she finished her service, Bill, she when people need to know that she was member of the military.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
And you served what, in Germany?
I served in Germany. Yes, I served overseas for 3 years, and total almost 6-year commitment, MP with the Army Corps.
Well, thanks for your service, especially in that capacity. There must be a lot of internal stuff you're doing in that role with an MP role. It would be my guess. On the base, I'm guessing that's some of the work you did.
Oh yeah, it was. Well, it depends on where you're stationed. You're either garrison, meaning, you do road work and you're out there patrolling like any other police officer. Our job where I was stationed at Misau Army Depot was to guard the connexes. And the connexes, though empty, most of them, they were still sealed. And that's where the nukes were until they were moved out off base. So we had some live nukes there for a while. So
that's led to many sleepless nights on my part to know that Jen was guarding the nukes.
Nah, for real. It's
Yikes.
Crazy. I went from being a deadhead to guarding nukes. Who knew?
I like that pathway right there. Maybe we should have more of that. You know what I mean? We might not have nukes anymore if that was the case.
True.
You got to know how to pivot.
Indeed.
It's a skill. It's funny you mentioned Steve Cass, because certainly that was a name that I was familiar with growing up, but then I had this job when I first started getting into media stuff. I guess like 3-4 years ago now is really when I started to do it. And my job was delivering Motif magazine around, and I'd have to drive all over northern Rhode Island and stop at all these places and count the magazines, be covered in ink or whatever. But it was a great experience because I was already listening to a ton of WPRO. But at that point, I was able to hear every show from the first news at 5 all the way through the Gresh show, because the amount of time that the deliveries took. And I remember when Steve Cass was filling in briefly for a few times. And at one point I was like, you know what? I'm going home. I'll deliver the rest of the papers tomorrow, because I wanted to watch him do a show via the webcam. And I was like, there's something here that is rare, at least to see sort of the old guard at work. And it was interesting for me to watch for 2.5 hours on the computer, watch Steve Cass do a radio show and move through callers and so on and so forth. It's not necessarily the modern talker approach, but it was great to sort of see somebody who was at one point certainly highly relevant in this market.
The old guard. Ouch.
Well, and I'm sitting here listening to you, and I thought I've got to ask, because it always fascinates me when a younger generation is embracing, something that seems as though it's, honestly, it's going to be a dinosaur in the next 10, 15, 20 years. What attracted you to talk radio? Because I know when I was 16, 17, 18, I loved Rush Limbaugh, and I didn't love him because I thought he was a great guy. I just loved listening to somebody's perspective that really had an opportunity to affect so many people and reach so many people. I was really drawn to that.
Yeah, I like it because it's sloppy and it's very, it's not always sloppy, but it can be sloppy. And I was really pulled into, I listened to a lot of news radio growing up, WCBS 880 in particular, but then I started to discover WEEI really around the time of like the 2003, 2004 Red Sox. And all of a sudden I found myself like, well, it's Wednesday, it's noon, it's time for the Dale and Newmy or Dale and Holly Terry Francona interview. So I'm just going to stop what I'm doing. And there was an appointment listening aspect to it. But then simultaneously, it was like a friend that was always there. No matter what time of day, you get in the car, you turn it on, it's there for you. And it's there live and sometimes local. And it really was about the moment. And I also love the fact that the interaction between the callers and the hosts, it's sort of like, obviously predates social media by so much, but it had a similar real-time interaction that even with podcasting, you just don't get. And I think with podcasting, you have the opportunity. I try not to do this. I rarely do this, but you can always recut. You can say, well, let's do it again, whatever. That I didn't like the way that came out. With radio, there's no recut. You're broadcasting sometimes to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, and that's it. That's the moment. I think it speaks to my songwriter roots as well, which is that I really have this theory that as a songwriter, and I think as a writer in general, you're not really creating something from scratch. You're more of a harvester. The song already exists in the stars, in the way that we can't understand everything about our experience. I think songs and pieces of art already exist, and your job is to just extract them. With talk radio, that stream of consciousness, it really comes from that same place. The spark of writing a song is the same spark that when the red light goes on, boom, the host or now me as a host taps into that same subconscious level. And that is just so fascinating and rare in any format. And I consider talk radio an art form the same way that I do sculpture, or, my wife's a painter, and we look at our work in the same context as far as making something out of nothing.
Well, that's one of the things I like more, because I did television too. I did TV sports for Channel 12 for years. And I was always asked, which one do you like better? Because television is so much more glamorous and what have you. No. Your body of work and TV, is what, doing sports, your body of work is 6 minutes a night, maybe 5 minutes a night. If you're lucky, on the weekends, we used to get that. Now it's like a minute and a half. Yeah. Whereas radio, it's much more of a finite body of work. And you actually feel as though you use the word sculpture. You actually feel as though you've sculpted something and created something when you walk away from it. So I just got so much more satisfaction out of radio than on television.
Yeah. And I think that you make a really important point. And I think that's so true for so many people. When I did overnight radio for a little bit there, you were
WBZ in Boston.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You're keeping people company. Yeah. You had a lot of people call and say, so-and-so passed, my wife died, my husband died, I'm old, alone, I'm sitting in wherever. I had people from overseas call me. So I think that's a really important part of the talk radio experience, is that you can turn on your radio and you're never alone. You're always with somebody. You can join a conversation. You can digest it. You can dissect it. You can agree. You can disagree. It's a really cool experience. And I just, it saddens me that when the terrestrial radio is on the demise, I feel that it is. And it's just because I feel that there's not enough being put into it. There's not enough new acts. There's not enough new voices. It's the same old people in syndication and wherever you are. And it's just, take risks, take chances, enliven it, showing a new generation, the beauty and the coolness of the radio experience.
You harken back to a guy like Cass. And, I've programmed, I've been behind the microphone, I've done just about, and I was president and general manager of PRO for a while. Harkening back to Cass is, you might want to call him a throwback, but one thing that Cass had that Strict Concert had years and years and years ago, they were conversationalists. Yeah. They had the ability to talk about anything and everything and allowed the audience to open it up. And, Jen doing overnights on WBZ with that signal, 50,000 watts, people can get on their fillings in Guatemala, So she had the opportunity to really just broaden it out. And a lot of times you let the audience take you in the different direction. You should never go in with a firm agenda. You should always go in saying, I just want to have a nice, solid conversation today.
This episode is brought to you by Elmwood Songwriters Club, presented by B-Town. It's a monthly showcase featuring 7 artists from all around the region. With the order drawn at random, each artist performs 2 songs. You can find details about when the next event is here in Providence by following me on Twitter and Instagram at Bill Bartholomew. Yeah, I agree with that. A lot of people ask me that. Like, when you go in, do you have notes? Is there a script? And it's like, no. We try to line up maybe a guest or 2 if it's relevant, and there's some general plan, but that subconscious and letting it just happen in real time is so critical to the format.
Yeah.
But it's also a fair question for people to ask that, because a lot of hosts do have predetermined where they're going to go. Yeah. And the really good hosts, they listen. A good interviewer listens, because you never know the person you're speaking to is going to drop a pearl. And if you don't grab onto that and have the ability, as I said earlier, to pivot and take it in a different direction, you might be missing a nice piece of fruit there.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
think, and just to add one last thing to this, I think that everybody wants to be seen and heard today. And while you can't be seen all the time, if you listen to and use talk radio, you can be heard. And the way that we interact with each other, listen, when I first started, you scream at me, I'll scream at you. You're pissy with me, I'll be pissed. And, but the way that we talk to each other has has had to change because of culture and societal demands and politics. And so I think it's really important that when people make that decision to call people's shows, that we honor that we can disagree and we can have some fun, but there's nothing more grating. When I hear people destroy the listener who's called up and not vilify them, but humiliate them, I think that's the part of talk radio that people, that turns people off, because it turns me off. And I've been listening since as I said, since I've been 17. So
there's always got to be a level of empathy in the conversation.
Yeah.
There's always got to be a level of respect.
That's lacking a lot today.
And quite frankly, I'll tell you what's lacking a lot today is humor too. The ability to laugh at yourself and the ability to laugh at situations. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. And going back to the notion of the decline of terrestrial radio. And I think that, if you look at whether you read Radio Inc. or whatever, Talkers Magazine, whatever it is, or just anecdotally, you ask people, sometimes they'll say like, hey, I'm on the radio, and people will be like, why? What's the point? I'm like, well, no, there's still a huge audience. Tens of thousands of people are still listening here. But what's interesting to me is we saw with this app Clubhouse that came out earlier this year that was really like a live chat room that wasn't podcasting. It was sort of like as many people as were interested could join a chat room, and the host would be talking live and those people would be listening. Now Spotify has expanded on their platform. They've sort of taken that technology and adapted it. We see live streaming like Twitch. And I think the real big shift is going to be when you get in your car and you start it up, and on the dial, or well, I guess not the dial, the LED screen, your presets are now a mixture of podcasts, Spotify playlists for music, and the adapted radio stations that are now broadcasting via digital, but are presenting that live, unfiltered, either local or national or global content. So it's about adaptations in the auto industry, I think, as much as anything else. But then also on the part of broadcast and media companies saying, hey, wait a minute, we need to pivot so that the magic of talk radio that is live and spontaneous and local and interactive, now it can be incorporated into new technologies on the phone and in the cars of the next 10 years.
And as soon as the broadcast companies figure out how to make more money on that, that's when they'll get proactive.
Bingo. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. Well, let's talk about your podcast, because that's exciting. The pivot from, it's not pivot. It's not like you still fill in from time to time on WPRO. And as recently as a year ago, Ron, you had a morning show here before, frankly, a somewhat evil corporation made a terrible decision to pipe in nonsense from Worcester, but okay. Yeah, it's fine.
My whole attitude is it's their toy and they can play with it the way that they want.
Yeah. Very adult of you.
Look, that's nice. And you move on. And, a lot of times I'm not in a situation where I'm trying to reinvent myself, nor is Jen, quite frankly. But the fact that we worked together on two different radio stations and did mornings together on two different radio stations, we got chemistry together and we have fun. And we just decided, look, let's air it out in a podcast, try it. We call it Ron and Jen's Great Escape. And the escape is all about, what I said earlier, let's have a few laughs. It's not all about the maudlin stuff that's talked on and on and on about. So we try to have as much fun with it as we can. And we laugh with each other, each other too.
We do. And, but it's not as though we don't talk about substantive issues, because we do. We, if there's something going on locally, or if there's something going on national, how do you avoid the vax conversation? How do you avoid vax mandates? How do you avoid, some of the things that are going on locally, whether it's a Lorza or, the governor, or so on and so forth. So, but I think what we show and what we do in this podcast, and, we give people an alternative. So if you don't want to see the split screen on either Fox News or MSNBC of people just, gnawing at each other and just waiting for their opportunity to go and bite someone else's throat, we can show you how you can talk again about something, differ on the issue, and still walk away, friends. And
Yeah.
I think that's what is lacking. In fact, we did a story a few podcasts ago, a little in trending, about how it's something about 3 out of 5 people have lost friends and family member connections during the pandemic because of politics. And that's a startling number. And when you think of now the holidays coming up and we're all going to gather again, and, we're going to try to, I mean, imagine that is breaking down in the middle of a pandemic, someone's politics, whether you're for Trump or Biden or this or that, or I mean, I think that it's really reached the peak, and we need to all, breathe again and figure out how to talk with one another and not at one another,
I completely agree. It's sad. It's shocking.
Yeah.
And I think we see now also more than ever, this notion that, I'm right and you're wrong, there's whatever issue it is. And it doesn't necessarily even have scientific or sociological or historical validation in a lot of issues. It's just like opinions have been elevated to holier than thou level in a way that is really dangerous. And I think it's really bad for sometimes progressives in this state. And I think it's really bad sometimes for Republicans in this state, especially that are further to the right, when they take these hardline positions that are like, well, don't talk to me because we're right. And you're, if you're on the right, you might say, well, you're some kind of socialist, why don't you move to North Korea or something like that? And then on the opposite side, it's, well, you must be a racist, fascist, horrible person because you have a conservative viewpoint on something. That's dangerous. And that doesn't help anybody's cause.
Well, from an entertainment standpoint, too, let's approach it that way, because let's face it, that's what we're doing, whether you're on the radio or you're on television or you're doing a podcast. With no diversity whatsoever, you're either right or you're wrong, and period. That's it. This is my opinion. You can hit the bricks. That creates a horrible, toxic environment for a viewer and for a listener. That's not enjoyable. Yeah. And the bottom line is, what we're supposed to be doing is entertaining people and keeping them engaged. That's not going to work.
Well, or, yes, entertainment, engaging them, but also, I used to try to, how can I say this? You have topics that are thought provoking, but you always wanted to have layers. And so, beyond, what do you think? And so then, okay, so you think this, and so let's explore how you got to that thought, or how that thought is so different from this group of people, or my opinion, or that group of people. And how can we come to some general consensus that, neither of us or all of us, we're not all crazy. We just all have different views, and that's okay too. And I think that's a really important part of the conversation. Bring the listener on a trip with you throughout your show, to maybe at the end saying, hey, I got some kind of revelation, or, hey, you know what? I'm going to think about that a little differently. And now you've got me thinking about something. I'm tuning in tomorrow to see what you're talking about. And I think that's the thing too. You don't want to use these little kitschy things, or we've got free stuff to give away, or, we're going to have this guest in studio. You've got to be interesting enough, and you've got to be thought provoking enough for people to come back for more. And as you mentioned earlier, that appointment listening, that's huge. If they like you, they'll listen.
It all comes
If they don't like you, they'll listen. But why?
It all comes back to the person who's in the chair,
That's
or the
right.
persons who are in the chair, because they're the ringmasters. And if they're not interesting and they're not engaging people to begin with, well, it doesn't matter what they do with their callers or with their guests. It all centers around the host or the hosts, plural.
Yeah. Last couple of minutes here. Your general takes, obviously, well, not obviously, and not a lot of people may know this, but I do. But Ron, you're on the board of directors for the Rhode Island Radio and Television Hall of Fame, and there's like a very special relationship between the Southern New England market and their media personalities. I guess if each of you can kind of talk about that, and why is that? And do you get the sense that that could be in danger as corporate culture in some formats is sort of switching to, frankly, let me get the younger, cheaper, more television telecentric personality on versus the trusted source that's been with people for sometimes decades?
I'll let you take that first.
Oh, I think on it, follow the money. I mean, I think it's really that simple. And I don't, I'd like to say that there's a lot more to it. I mean, I just think of recently, we saw what happened with Kelly Bates. And while there's some interest and discussion around, did she accept a contract? Would she accept something that was less than what she, wanted? Or did they offer? Channel 10 says that. I'm using this as, I hope that's okay, by the way.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I was shocked when I found out she was leaving. I loved her. I loved seeing her on television. And I think that, a lot of people are taking a lot less money to do a job that they love, because these corporate people just don't want to pay what they used to, because they don't have to, because there is Twitter, there is Facebook, there are so many social outlets and different avenues to go now, and they know that. And so they don't have to pay that money to isolate to that 3-hour time block on the radio or that 2-hour time block on TV. And they don't want to do it. I mean, that's the way that I see it.
The whole Kelly Bates thing is inside baseball. Everybody thinks that they understand how contracts work. Everybody thinks they understand broadcast law, and that's all crap, because they don't understand it. They just know what is posted and blah, blah, blah. I always hate to see people lose their gigs.
Yeah.
To answer your question directly, is it in trouble? Of course it's in trouble, because, how many local ownerships do we have anymore? And that's what comes into play there. The most important thing is who's ever in place making local decisions, they better make those decisions. They got to answer to corporate. There's no question about that. But they really have to look around and say, how is my bread buttered? And, local personalities, there's that connection to the audience. And if you start to lose that, you're gonna lose big, and you're gonna lose revenue too.
Well, let me ask you this now. It's not a one size fits all. So when you've got a corporation that says we want to do this across the board, whether it's Nebraska or Rhode Island or Colorado or California, you can't do that. It just doesn't work. Yeah. It might be cost effective, but in order to, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
in order to make get the most money, which is what you want to do, you want to win, you've got to understand the environment that you're playing to and in. And I think that's a huge part of the problem these days. It's like a flat fee. It's going to be this way all across the country. That's no good.
One of the most difficult things is when somebody like me, who has been programming in this market for 43 years, says to somebody at a corporate level, you really don't understand this market. They think they do. They don't understand the market. The people who are in place in those markets, who were born and raised and, came up the ladder, if you will, those people's opinions are valuable, and they should be valued too, not poo-pooed. Like Jen said, if it worked in Nebraska, they can work here. It's not the case.
Karen Adams said something really profound and incredibly true at the Rhode Island Radio Hall of Fame and TV event. What's the
inductions?
Yeah, the official title there. When she gave her speech upon acceptance of her award, she said, we really worked in this industry at the best possible time. And I couldn't agree with her more. I mean, 20 years ago, was it 15, 20 years ago?
20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago. It was so different. And that's unbelievable to say, but it was, because corporations took risks. They were willing to say, we're going to try this, and we're going to put you in that time slot, and we're going to put you on TV from 6 to 10. And people enjoyed it. It came through their jobs. It came through the listenership and the community. And it's just too bad that it's now all just a big business venture, instead of, let's really try to make this, something special in the community that we live in. But, as I say to Ron on the podcast all the time, what do I know?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I was assuming you were going to say that. I was there that night as well. And when Karen Adams said that, I was thinking, that does sound about right, because that's when, I think back to NBC 10, which is the station that I grew up watching in great detail. I remember RJ Heim did a week-long story on UFO encounters in Rhode Island, on the 6 o'clock news. Jim Terracani had 30-minute specials that aired at 7 o'clock, incredibly intricate, patriarchal crime family investigations that were aired as specials, television specials. And that's the stuff that hooked me in, but that made me elevate those characters to the same level as any musical artist or any athlete that I was interested in. And so in a way, when she said that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. That's totally true. But then I also thought, well, maybe we're going to enter a time where with the emerging independent media and the emerging, sort of the new dynamics of digital media, maybe there's a chance to get that back in a larger scale. And we might be entering a second wave of that, just not on the television screen. So it'll be interesting to see.
Rhode Island's podcast of record, B-Town.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.